A clip is everywhere right now. A woman standing in a parking lot, hands trembling, breath uneven, trying to explain that she had to take her child to urgent care, alone. Another one, somewhere in a grocery store aisle, tears sliding down her face as she stares at cereal boxes because daycare plus groceries means she can't financially breathe anymore. Another woman spirals because her landlord won't fix a leaking pipe and she doesn't even know who to call next. These moments aren't rare anymore. They've become a genre. Modern women crashing into reality, one basic responsibility at a time. Carl Jung warned about this long before TikTok existed. He wrote, "People don't grow by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Today's viral collapses are exactly what happens when the darkness was never faced. A modern woman can memorize every empowerment mantra, every independence slogan, every affirmation about choosing herself. But the moment real life shows up, without filters, without safety nets, without a man quietly carrying the weight behind the scenes, the entire self-image she built unravels in minutes. Not because she's weak, but because she was trained for attention, not adulthood. You can see the shift step by step. She leaves a stable home because she's not fulfilled. She walks out of a marriage because she's not happy. She chooses to have a child with a man who was never going to stay because she didn't need him. She picks excitement over security, validation over partnership, dopamine over discipline. And for a while, she feels empowered. Then reality arrives, quietly, consistently, without pity. The bills stack up, the child gets sick, the car breaks down, the loneliness becomes physical, the nights feel endless, and suddenly the camera turns on, the tears begin, and the meltdown follows. Jung wrote, "The persona is a mask that feigns individuality. That mask is cracking everywhere." She built her identity around independence. But what she called independence was actually freedom from responsibility. Someone else fixed the car, someone else held the household together, someone else absorbed the pressure. Someone else maintained the stability she took for granted. The moment that someone disappears, she meets a part of herself she never developed. And that's where the collapse begins. In every shaky voice you can hear it, "I can't do this alone. This is too much. Why is everything so hard?" Because adulthood is not a mood, not a vibe, not an aesthetic. It is a skill set, one she never had to build. Jung said the childish parts of us don't vanish. They simply hide until life demands them. That's what we're seeing, the child self grabbing the wheel in an adult world. The shadow, untested, undisciplined, emotionally reactive, is now running the show. And the real world doesn't negotiate with it. These breakdowns are not about the actual situations. They are about the sudden realization that she is face to face with a life she never prepared for, not emotionally, not psychologically, not practically. Real life is indifferent. It doesn't slow down because someone grew up sheltered. It doesn't soften because someone was told they're special. It doesn't adjust itself to match TikTok ideologies about independence. Life demands competence, not confidence, not slogans, not empowerment speeches, competence. And when competence is missing, collapse becomes instant. This is why so many modern women fall apart over problems men barely register. Not because men are superior, but because men were raised with a simple instruction. If something goes wrong, you handle it. Women were raised with a different instruction. If something goes wrong, someone will help you. Now that someone is gone. The situations that break modern women today are the routine responsibilities previous generations faced without applause, without cameras, without meltdown videos. They understood a reality today's culture hides. Life doesn't wait until you're ready. It simply expects you to function. Jung explained that when someone avoids real challenges for too long, their psyche inflates. It creates a grand self-image that reality later crushes. He said, "Inflation is always a sign of weakness, for it means one lacks the strength to endure reality." That inflation is bursting across social media. Take the woman who bragged for years about not needing a man and wanting adventure, only to find herself panicking over basic home repairs or the weight of raising kids alone. Nothing tragic happened to her, nothing extraordinary. She simply stepped into adulthood, The adulthood she rejected when it was given to her in the form of a stable partnership. And when the burden arrived, it crushed the version of herself she thought was strong but was never tested. Jung warned that when the performance mask grows too distant from the real self, the collision is brutal. When the mask breaks, the emotional explosion looks dramatic, but the trigger is usually something small. A child's cold turning into a sleepless night. A bill arriving sooner than expected. A strange noise coming from the car engine. A boss asking for a task that requires focus she never developed. Men watch this confusion unfold because, to them, these are normal demands of life. Not fun, not easy, but manageable. They learned early on that the world doesn't care how they feel. No one is coming. You act or you sink. Women, on the other hand, were raised inside a narrative where difficulty itself was unfair, where any obstacle was a violation, where struggle meant something was wrong. Now that life expects them to carry the same weight men have always carried, they interpret the pressure as collapse, even though the world functions exactly as it always has. One of the clearest signs of this psychological unraveling is the emotional escalation that happens when a modern woman encounters a problem she cannot outsource. When a man faces a situation he can't immediately solve, he shifts into problem-solving mode, not because he's naturally stone-hearted, but because he was conditioned to believe that he is the final line of defense. When a modern woman faces a situation she can't solve, she often shifts into emotional overload because she was conditioned to believe that someone should have prevented this from happening, that the burden is unfair, that the situation is too much, that life has betrayed her. Jung described this vividly: the confrontation with the shadow self, the undeveloped, untested, unprepared aspects of the psyche that rise when life removes all buffers. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The darkness here is simple. Adulthood demands resilience. It demands responsibility. It demands structure, emotional regulation, discipline, and resourcefulness. Qualities many modern women were never required to develop because someone else always handled the difficult parts of life for them. This is why independence becomes a shock instead of an achievement. It's not that modern women lack intelligence or ability. Many are brilliant in theory, but capability without preparation turns into panic the moment pressure hits. A woman raised to believe she should never struggle, whose parents solved everything, whose teachers excused everything, whose partners absorbed everything, whose society patted her back for everything, enters adulthood. Thinking struggle itself is abnormal. So when normal life pressure appears, she interprets it as catastrophe, as injustice, as trauma. She believes something is wrong with the world when, in truth, something is missing inside her, the framework to carry life. Jung understood this perfectly. He explained that an untempered psyche becomes brittle, and brittleness breaks long before real strength is even tested. That's what these breakdown videos are, the sound of brittle people cracking under ordinary demands. Meanwhile, the men who once provided the invisible structure, the emotional steadiness, the mechanical know-how, the quiet endurance, are gone. Either she left them, or she never chose them. Without that structure, the independent life she romanticized becomes unstable in days. Jung would say she isn't collapsing under life. She's collapsing under the illusion that life would always feel easy. The most revealing part of this collapse appears the moment children enter the picture. Parenting exposes instantly whether a person was raised to be an adult or raised to expect rescue. Jung captured this tragedy in one brutal sentence: "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." Today, it's the unlived adulthood of the mother that becomes the burden of the child. Teachers see the pattern every day. Kids from chaotic single-mother homes, not because the father abandoned them, but because she chased a man who was never going to stay or pushed away the one who would, arrive at school exhausted, hungry, overstimulated, emotionally fragile. Not because their mother doesn't care, but because she is overwhelmed by responsibilities she believed she could avoid just by declaring independence. The missing father isn't just a missing person. He is a missing structure, a missing stabilizer, a missing psychological anchor. Jung believed the psyche needs both order and energy. In homes where the mother tries to provide both, where she must be the nurturer and the disciplinarian, the comfort and the structure, the entire system fractures, because the burden is too heavy for someone who was never prepared to carry it alone. Modern women's breakdowns over basic tasks don't just affect them, they shape their children. What makes this dynamic even harsher is that everything men do becomes invisible until they stop doing it. The quiet labor of masculinity, the stress absorption, the stability, the mechanical competence, the emotional steadiness, goes unnoticed until it disappears. Only then does its absence become loud. Jung wrote that when a person ignores the contributions of others, the psyche becomes imbalanced and begins to project blame outward. This is exactly what we see today. Women convinced men were oppressive or unnecessary, only to realize later that what they called oppression was actually structure, and what they dismissed as unnecessary was the invisible foundation that kept their daily life running. Now they discover the cruel truth. Independence isn't glamorous, it's demanding. It means no one fixes the problems when you're tired. It means no one steps in when you're overwhelmed. It means the house doesn't run unless you run it. It means comfort is not something you feel, it's something you work to build. Jung believed the psyche grows through responsibility because responsibility stretches the self. But when responsibility lands on someone unprepared, the self doesn't stretch, it shatters. And the shattering shows up in emotional theatrics. Instead of solving problems, many modern women perform their struggle. They broadcast it. They chase sympathy instead of competence. They confuse emotional expression with emotional strength. Every inconvenience becomes a trauma. Every challenge becomes a crisis. Jung warned that emotional inflation creates fragility, and fragility leads to overreaction. That is why a flat tire becomes an existential emergency, why a late fee becomes a meltdown, why a single stressful day turns into a breakdown video viewed by millions. They're not reacting to the situation, they're reacting to the realization that they have no inner scaffolding to support it. And the tragedy is that these breakdowns ripple outward. They don't stay confined to that moment. They shape patterns, influence homes, and distort entire family systems. As men watch this unfold, many simply walk away. Not because they hate women, but because they refuse to partner with someone they will have to parent. They know a simple truth. A relationship where the man must carry the entire emotional, financial, structural, and psychological load is not a relationship. It is a rescue mission. For men, the collapse is predictable. You can see it years before the first TikTok meltdown. Jung articulated this in one of his most powerful warnings. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That is exactly what is happening. Women make a series of unconscious choices, choosing excitement over stability, validation over commitment, freedom over responsibility, and when the consequences arrive, they call it unfairness, bad luck, or oppression. They don't recognize the truth. They are living the life built by their own impulses. You can watch the phases unfold like clockwork. She leaves a stable partner because comfort feels like stagnation. She convinces herself she deserves more, even though she has never built the foundation for more. She spends years chasing an identity instead of a life. She builds herself around feelings instead of responsibility. And then adulthood arrives. Kids needing routine, finances needing discipline, homes needing maintenance, schedules needing consistency. Suddenly, she discovers she never developed the internal structure needed to hold anything together. Jung would say she refused to strengthen the parts of herself that were weak. Now those weak parts confront her all at once. The emotional fragility rewarded by modern culture only accelerates the collapse. Instead of confronting their shortcomings, many women double down on victimhood because it provides instant emotional reward. A crying video brings praise. A breakdown story brings sympathetic comments. A narrative of oppression brings validation. Jung warned about this mechanism. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, meaning a person creates dramatic emotional responses to avoid the real work of facing their shadow. That is exactly what modern breakdown culture has become. A stage to avoid accountability. The meltdown becomes the shield. The tears become the justification. The emotional display becomes the substitute for growth. Meanwhile, men quietly step back. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They see what partnering with this mindset requires: endless emotional babysitting, Never being allowed to falter. Carrying double the weight. Being blamed for every failure. Being expected to fix everything while receiving none of the stability or respect a partner provides. Most men refuse to sign up for that, and they shouldn't. As men withdraw, modern women become even more overwhelmed. There comes a moment in every person's life where excuses run out and reality steps in with its full, unapologetic weight. For many modern women, that moment is now. The breakdowns, the panic, the emotional spirals, none of it is proof that life is uniquely cruel. It's proof that they were never prepared for the life they chose. Jung warned that a person who avoids responsibility creates an inner vacuum where strength should be. And when life eventually demands that strength, the vacuum implodes. That implosion is what we're watching across social media. Meltdowns over ordinary challenges because the internal framework required to handle them was never built. But here's the turning point. Collapse is not the end, it's the invitation. The moment the persona shatters, the real self finally has a chance to grow. Jung believed that confronting the shadow, the untrained, untested parts of the psyche, is the doorway to maturity. The women willing to face their shadow instead of performing victimhood will rebuild faster than they ever imagined. And for men, this truth matters equally. You cannot fix someone who refuses to face themselves. You cannot build a life with someone who treats responsibility like oppression. You cannot partner with someone who uses emotional chaos as a strategy. Jung insisted that two mature individuals create a container strong enough to hold a shared life. Anything less becomes a burden carried by one. The future belongs to those who choose strength over comfort and accountability over theatrics. Women who embrace responsibility will discover that independence isn't suffering, it's competence. Men who choose partners rather than dependence will build families grounded in stability, not chaos. The world isn't unfair, it's indifferent, and the moment you accept that, everything changes. If this message hit hard, let it wake you. Like, share, subscribe, and keep this conversation alive. The culture won't fix itself, but awakened individuals can.